Hi there, welcome to the Healing Migraines Naturally podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Leslie Caesar, and I am a licensed naturopathic doctor, former chronic migraine sufferer, and I've dedicated my life to helping other women with chronic migraines rediscover a migraine-free life. So welcome to the podcast today. Today we are going to tackle a very, very prominent topic within the functional medicine space or the alternative medicine space. If you have seen a functional medicine doctor or a naturopathic doctor or a chiropractor, any of my colleagues in the alternative medicine industry, if you've been listening to podcasts, health-related podcasts, some of the big name related podcasts, you have probably heard the acronym MTHFR, and today we are going to tackle this on the podcast. A few weeks ago, I got an email from a podcast listener, and she said, hey, I love the podcast. Can you talk about MTHFR? And I said, you know what? We got to tackle this one. We're going to tackle this one this week. So this is going to be more of a technical podcast. I do want to walk you through the biochemistry that's at play here, because to really understand why this, hyped up concern about MTHFR is really not all that the hype has led you to believe. In order to really understand that, we do have to go into the biochemistry that is affected here. So I'm going to hopefully do that well and walk you through it in a way that makes sense. But you might even want to, you could even take notes a little bit if you wanted to. So let's go ahead and dive in. Let's start with what you probably already know, right? You've heard about MTHFR. Maybe you've even had a genetic test for it. Maybe you're taking methylfolate right now because you found out that you do have the variant. Maybe you read a book about it, or your naturopathic doctor or your functional medicine doctor brought it up to you. So here's the story that you've been given, okay? You have a genetic variant, a mutation in a gene called MTHFR, and that variant slows down your methylation. So what is methylation? Methylation is how your body recycles the raw materials or the nutrients that it runs on. Okay, so when a nutrient does its job and is used up, right? Nutrients are, like the fuel for different processes within the body. Or, if you're going to make furniture, you have to have wood, right? Nutrients are like the wood. Okay, so when a nutrient does its job, the nutrient gets, you could say, used up. Hi there, I want to jump in real quick and tell you about my client Beth. She was getting 15 to 20 migraines and headaches per month, and as you can imagine, this was impacting her work performance and her confidence. She also has 2 small children, and she was starting to feel like she was a horrible mom because she had nothing left for them at the end of the day. But she reached out and she booked a free consult call with me, and after I asked her about her migraines and her health history, I felt confident that I could help her. I help women uncover the root drivers of their migraines and follow a step-by-step plan to dramatically reduce the frequency by up to 90% without adding more medication or taking a bunch of supplements. So we built her personal migraine map, followed the plan, and now she will get 1 to 2 migraines per year, which she uses ibuprofen to treat if she needs to, versus up to 15 to 20 per month when we first started working together that weren't responding well to any medication. She just reached out to tell me that she got a promotion at work, she's on top of her career again, and has been able to come off all of her migraine medication. But most importantly, she's a confident mom again, and she's attending birthday parties at Jump Zone with her kids and saying yes instead of saying maybe later. I've worked with women like Beth from all over the United States who were told, this is the best we can do, but they were still willing to dig deeper. So if you're serious about changing your migraine story, go to drlesliecaesar.com/apply or tap the link in the show notes, and on our free consult, we'll map out why your migraines keep coming back and the first 3 steps you can take over the next 30 days. I do cap new client spots each month, so if the calendar is full, the doors are closed for now. But if you're done feeling helpless and ready to do the work to heal, pause this episode for 30 seconds and book that consult call now. So methylation is the process that puts it back into circulation so that it can be used again. So MTHFR is one of the enzymes involved in that recycling process. So if you have the variant, the specific variant is called C677T. A lot of times it's just called the T variant. If you have that variant, you recycle those nutrients a little more slowly than average, or a little bit more slowly than the person who doesn't have the variant in the gene. So if you're recycling a little bit more slowly, then things pile up. And then because it's not recycled as quickly, you don't have the recycled nutrient back in the lineup, back in the biochemical system as quickly, all right? Because it's running a little bit more slowly. So then those nutrients are a little bit in shorter supply. So if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you know that I talk about the 3 things that our body needs in order to maintain a state of health. And if we fall out of a state of health and start getting migraines, how do we recover our health? Okay, so there's 3 things that the body needs in order to do that. I call these the 3 principles. The first principle is we have to get the nutrients that your cells need to your cells. Okay, so this MTHFR conversation falls under this first principle umbrella. Okay, so now when I talk about the first principle, okay, the first thing your body needs to be in a state of health, to recover your health, to feel good again, your cells have to have the nutrients that they need to run properly. People hear that and they say, Dr. Leslie is going to give me a diet. She's talking about what I eat. And I already eat really well, right? I'm worried about food triggers. I wouldn't even dream of touching something with MSG, right? I wouldn't dream of eating leftovers for fear of histamine, right? I'm already cooking my food at home. I'm already shopping at Whole Foods, right? This is what a lot of people hear when I talk about we've got to get the nutrients that your cells need to the cells. Okay, now I'm hoping that this podcast is also not only going to teach people a lot about this MTHFR hype, but it's also going to help people realize that it's not just what you're eating, right? Certainly we have to eat food with nutrients in it, but there's, untold steps and processes after we're putting the food in our mouth that have to go properly. Okay, so what you eat is only the beginning. And like I've talked about on other podcasts, a lot of migraine sufferers are actually restricting foods. If we're restricting foods, we're restricting our nutrient intake as well. Okay, but again, the point here is that there's an entire chain of biochemical processes that have to work for that nutrient that you put into your mouth that was in the food that you're eating to actually end up inside a cell where it can do its job. So this methylation process is one of those processes that get the nutrients to the cell at the time that the cell needs it. MTHFR is one of the enzymes, not the only enzyme. Like if you're listening to the hype, you would think that this was the only thing that was going on. It's one of the enzymes that keeps that conveyor belt running. So when MTHFR is sluggish, and if you have the genetic variant in the enzyme, yes, that enzyme is going to be a little sluggish. It's going to run a little bit slower. So when MTHFR is sluggish, the recycling step doesn't complete as quickly, and then your cells end up short on what they need. So methylation, this recycling process, is involved in almost everything that your body does. Making chemicals that regulate your mood, repairing your DNA, keeping your hormones in balance, clearing waste material from your blood. If the recycling step is impaired, all those things are impaired. They're going to be a little sluggish. So the mechanism that you've been given is this. MTHFR is the enzyme that converts folic acid into methylfolate, the active form that your cells need. And if you have the C677T variant, that conversion is sluggish. Folic acid builds up, methylfolate runs short, and everything downstream suffers. So what is the fix? Avoid folic acid, take methylfolate, get tested, get the genetic test run. There is an entire supplement industry built around exactly this framework. And over the last decade, MTHFR has become the explanation or the scapegoat for nearly everything. Depression, anxiety, miscarriage, autism, ADHD, heart disease, cancer risk, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, migraines, chemical sensitivities. One gene, every chronic condition. So when one gene is being blamed for every chronic illness, that should prompt a question. And here is my reply. Every one of those conditions is there because the body is not in a state of health. A body that is not in a state of health doesn't have the nutrients that it needs to function properly. That connection to this methylation recycling process is very real, but this is not a one gene problem. MTHFR is one enzyme in one step of a much larger system. The reason those conditions, those health conditions exist is the entire picture of what's preventing nutrients from getting to the cells, not one gene. So, the functional medicine world, the naturopathic medicine world was pointing at a legitimate problem. Folic acid is genuinely an issue. Methylfolate is genuinely better. They got there before, mainstream medicine did, and that's great. But unfortunately, they've all pointed at the wrong enzyme. And that one error changes everything, including who this problem actually applies to. So before I want to tell you what's wrong with this MTHFR story, I need to show you how the system actually works, because once you understand this, the mistake is going to be pretty obvious. So let's talk about food, okay? So when you eat spinach or lentils or avocados, these are three foods that are, higher than average in folate. Notice I said folate, not folic acid. We're going to come back to that. So when you eat spinach or lentils or an avocado, the folate in that food starts its journey in the digestive tract. And, our digestive tract, it's not just like this tube that, the food is just sort of, moving through. It's an active participant. The cells lining your small intestine do part of the conversion work themselves. So as folate is absorbed, those intestinal cells convert it into methylfolate right there in the gut wall. Now, that conversion depends on those cells being healthy and functioning properly. So if digestion is compromised, low stomach acid, damaged gut lining, chronic inflammation within the digestive tract, that conversion step is impaired. So just eating the right food is not enough on its own if your digestion is not functioning properly, right? And this is something that just drives migraine sufferers just mad, right? Because we're so careful with our diet, way more careful than anybody else. And then we're wondering why we're not getting the payoff from all of that diligence. So the infrastructure, your digestive tract that processes the food, that digests the food, that breaks the food down, that does these nutrient conversions, that has to be working too. The folate in the food that we eat comes in two forms. Okay, and this is where it gets really important. The first is reduced folate. So reduced simply means the folate is already in a form your body can work with. So about half of the reduced folate in real food is in its final ready-to-use form, methylfolate. You don't have to convert it. MTHFR doesn't have to do anything with half of the reduced folate that you eat in your food. The plant already converted it before you ever took a bite. So this is the same methylfolate you might be taking as a supplement. The plant already made it for you. The other half of the reduced folate is close, okay? It just needs that final conversion step in the intestinal cells to become methylfolate. MTHFR is the enzyme that handles that conversion. Okay, so we've got two forms of folate. The first form is the reduced folate. Half of that is already methylated. The plant already recycled it. The other half, that's what the MTHFR enzyme has to convert so that we can use it. So that's pretty good, right? Right out of the gate, that's a pretty good story. The second form of the folate is called oxidized folate. So this is folate that's been degraded. Think of it like the way iron rusts when it's exposed to air or heat, oxygen, right? It becomes oxidized. Hi there, I want to jump in real quick and tell you about my client Beth. She was getting 15 to 20 migraines and headaches per month, and as you can imagine, this was impacting her work performance and her confidence. She also has two small children, and she was starting to feel like she was a horrible mom because she had nothing left for them at the end of the day. But she reached out and she booked a free consult call with me, and after I asked her about her migraines and her health history, I felt confident that I could help her. I help women uncover the root drivers of their migraines and follow a step-by-step plan to dramatically reduce the frequency by up to 90% without adding more medication or taking a bunch of supplements. So we built her personal migraine map, followed the plan, and now she will get 1 to 2 migraines per year, which she uses ibuprofen to treat if she needs to, versus up to 15 to 20 per month when we first started working together that weren't responding well to any medication. She just reached out to tell me that she got a promotion at work, she's on top of her career again, and has been able to come off all of her migraine medication. But most importantly, she's a confident mom again, and she's attending birthday parties at Jump Zone with her kids and saying yes instead of saying maybe later. I've worked with women like Beth from all over the United States who were told, this is the best we can do, but they were still willing to dig deeper. So if you're serious about changing your migraine story, go to drlesliecaesar.com/apply or tap the link in the show notes, and on our free consult, we'll map out why your migraines keep coming back and the first 3 steps you can take over the next 30 days. I do cap new client spots each month, so if the calendar is full, the doors are closed for now. But if you're done feeling helpless and ready to do the work to heal, pause this episode for 30 seconds and book that consult call now. So for folate, naturally occurring in the food, the exposure to the air, to heat, you've stored it, it's exposed to oxygen, that breaks some of the folate down before you ever eat it. Oxidized folate can't follow the same path as reduced folate right away. It has to be converted first. The enzyme that does that conversion is called DHFR. So DHFR reduces the oxidized folate back into a usable form so that the body can continue processing it from there. So think of it as two starting points, but the destination ends up the same. Reduced folate is starting practically already at the finish line, right? Half of it already arrives at the finish line as methylfolate, and the other half just needs like a little bump from MTHFR for that final step to get it over the finish line. Oxidized folate, right, that's starting farther back. DHFR has to convert it first before it can travel the rest of the way of the pathway. So in a whole foods diet, okay, like if you're eating real food, the oxidized folate fraction is small. It's like a little background noise. DHFR handles it easily. The vast majority of your folate is starting close to the destination. So the system works. This is what the body was designed for. Okay, so you're eating food, you're eating regular food, natural food, and the vast majority of folate in that food, half of it is already ready to go. The plant converted it for you. Then the DHFR enzyme reduces it, and then it just continues on. Okay, this is not a massive problem. Now hold that picture, okay, because let me bring you back to what you've been told. So you've got the MTHFR variant. You can't process folic acid. You need to avoid it. But let's be precise. What exactly is folic acid? Folic acid is oxidized folate. It is entirely synthetic. It's a molecule that was first created in the 1940s that did not exist anywhere in nature. There's no whole food on earth that contains it. It began appearing in vitamin supplements in the 1970s, and then it started being voluntarily added to some grain products and cereals before it became mandated in 1998. Okay, so on January 1st, 1998, this is when it became mandatory to fortify or enrich cereal foods, like cereal grain foods, with folic acid. So this is, when you are in the flour aisle and you see the label on the bag of flour that says enriched. Okay, so if you're having a factory make your food, they're going to be using enriched flours. Okay, now if you're buying organic, that is a different story, but kind of the default, because this is mandatory by law, the default is going to be additional folic acid added to the flour. So this is like enriched bread, enriched pasta, enriched rice, okay? If you're eating conventional packaged grain products, most white bread, boxed pasta, packaged cereals, folic acid has been added to them. So because folic acid is oxidized, it starts at the back of the line. It has to go through DHFR first, okay? All of it has to go through this DHFR conversion process first. The reason that DHFR even tries to process folic acid is because it's so similar in structure to oxidized folate. Okay, so folic acid is close enough to the naturally degraded or oxidized folate that your body has always encountered, and DHFR recognizes it as something that it should convert, but they're not actually the exact same molecule. Folic acid is more fully oxidized, and DHFR handles it far less efficiently than the natural forms it evolved for. So instead of that like tiny fraction that DHFR was designed to handle, folic acid now arrives in every fortified food, every meal, every day. If we hadn't added it to the food supply, DHFR would never have been overwhelmed. This problem is entirely the product of fortification. Now, here's the part that nobody's talking about. The story you've been given says that MTHFR is where folic acid get stuck, that the backup of folic acid is occurring at MTHFR. It isn't. The backup is at DHFR. Have you ever heard anyone talk about DHFR? MTHFR doesn't touch folic acid directly. Before folic acid can ever reach MTHFR, it has to clear DHFR first. DHFR goes first when folate is oxidized, or this heavily oxidized folic acid molecule is introduced. So the backup is happening there, not at MTHFR. And here's why this completely changes this conversation. DHFR has absolutely nothing to do with the MTHFR genetic variant. Human DHFR runs slow in everyone, and I mean everyone. So there was a landmark study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in 2009. Okay, we're in 2026. This study measured DHFR activity in human liver tissue and compared it to rats. And what did they find? Humans convert folic acid through DHFR at less than 2% of the rate of rats. Less than 2%. So now consider what that means for research, because most of what we know about how the body handles new compounds comes from rat studies. Rats are the standard, stand-in for humans in preclinical research, right? We're not going to introduce something to a person and we have no idea what the safety is. We're going to put that in a rat first, okay? Now, this rat testing, this is the foundation of how safety is established before something reaches the population. But here is a case where a rat is exactly the wrong model, because a rat clears folic acid efficiently. A rat's DHFR doesn't get overwhelmed the way that a human's does. So if you are a researcher trying to understand what happens when people eat a synthetic molecule that never existed on Earth before 1940, and you are using rats to find out, you will reach a much rosier conclusion than reality warrants. The rats are fine. The research said so. The humans are a different story. Okay? So think about that timing. Mandatory fortification started in January 1st, 1998. This study came out in 2009, 11 years after the entire population was already eating folic acid at basically every meal. Mandatory fortification has now been running for 28 years. That's more than a generation. But folic acid was already in the food supply before that, in supplements since the 1970s, and voluntarily in some foods years before the mandate made it universal. So folic acid has been part of the American diet for decades. So what happens when DHFR is overwhelmed? Let's go into that, okay? Because this is where the problems really start to occur. If DHFR is overwhelmed by folic acid and it's struggling to reduce it, okay, because remember, folic acid is highly oxidized. Researchers call this molecule UMFA, and UMFA accumulates in the bloodstream. So this is not hypothetical. They've done tests. Most Americans have detectable levels of UMFA right now. Not from taking supplements, but from eating bread and pasta and cereal from the food supply. So here's what circulating UMFA, this is the unmetabolized folic acid, does. It blocks real folate. To understand how, it helps to understand something about how nutrients actually get into the cells. Because again, we think that we eat food and it just goes through our digestive tract, this sort of passive tube, and then somehow these nutrients get into our bloodstream and then they just sort of float into the cell, right? They just kind of travel in there, right? So it's not as simple as that. So most nutrients cannot just drift through the wall of a cell. The cell membrane is a barrier, and to get through it, a nutrient needs to be recognized and grabbed by a specific receptor on the cell surface. So your cells that have these receptors, right? So your cell is sort of like a little circular bubble, and there's a wall that's made out of fatty acids. And so there's these little receptors that kind of poke out through the cell membrane. These are structures that are outside of the cell that are designed to bind specific nutrients and bring them in. That process requires energy. Your cells have to actively work to pull in what they need. And if you've been listening to the podcast, you've heard me talk about the third principle that our body needs, that's required for things to function optimally, for us to feel good, for us to be in a state of health. And I call that our own resiliency and vitality. At the cellular level, that's the cellular energy or the cellular voltage. So if we have low cellular energy or voltage, if we're lacking in that third principle, we're going to have a harder time bringing these nutrients into the cell. So you need the right receptors in adequate numbers, and you need the cellular energy to run that process. So getting a nutrient from your bloodstream into a cell where it can actually do something is not just automatic. So much has to run properly. So folate enters cells through receptors designed specifically for it. But when folic acid is circulating in the bloodstream, it competes for those same receptors. So two things happen. In some cases, the receptor grabs the folic acid and then pulls it into the cell. But once that folic acid is inside, it still needs DHFR to convert it. DHFR operates inside cells, and inside the cell, it's no better equipped to handle folic acid than it was anywhere else. So the folic acid made it in, but it still cannot be used. In other cases, the folic acid binds to a receptor and just sits there, occupying it, and that blocks real folate from latching on to that receptor and being pulled into the cell. So either way, real folate loses. So you can be eating all the right foods, and the UMFA from your fortified morning cereal is still competing for those receptors. It's taking spots that real folate needs, and it leaves your cells short on the one form that they can actually use. So UMFA, this is bad enough, but studies also show that UMFA suppresses natural killer cells, the immune system's first line of defense against cancer cells and viruses. Natural killer cells patrol your body looking for cells that have gone wrong. Research has found an association, so this is not, fully settled yet, but research has found an association between circulating UMFA and reduced natural killer cell activity. So we've got less clearance and less surveillance. And excess UMFA can actually inhibit the DHFR enzyme, the very enzyme that is supposed to be clearing it. So, and this is the case with several biochemical processes. If you get a backup, unfortunately, the backup makes it worse, okay? So the problem feeds on itself. Hi there, I want to jump in real quick and tell you about my client Beth. She was getting 15 to 20 migraines and headaches per month, and as you can imagine, this was impacting her work performance and her confidence. She also has 2 small children, and she was starting to feel like she was a horrible mom because she had nothing left for them at the end of the day. But she reached out and she booked a free consult call with me, and after I asked her about her migraines and her health history, I felt confident that I could help her. I help women uncover the root drivers of their migraines and follow a step-by-step plan to dramatically reduce the frequency by up to 90% without adding more medication or taking a bunch of supplements. So we built her personal migraine map, followed the plan, and now she will get 1 to 2 migraines per year, which she uses ibuprofen to treat if she needs to, versus up to 15 to 20 per month when we first started working together that weren't responding well to any medication. She just reached out to tell me that she got a promotion at work, she's on top of her career again, and has been able to come off all of her migraine medication. But most importantly, she's a confident mom again, and she's attending birthday parties at Jump Zone with her kids and saying yes instead of saying maybe later. I've worked with women like Beth from all over the United States who were told, this is the best we can do, but they were still willing to dig deeper. So if you're serious about changing your migraine story, go to drlesliecaesar.com/apply or tap the link in the show notes, and on our free consult, we'll map out why your migraines keep coming back and the first 3 steps you can take over the next 30 days. I do cap new client spots each month, so if the calendar is full, the doors are closed for now. But if you're done feeling helpless and ready to do the work to heal, pause this episode for 30 seconds and book that consult call now. So why do we do this, right? It's like, why do we keep doing this to ourselves, right? So here's why folic acid was chosen for fortification in the first place. The evidence showing that adequate folate in early pregnancy dramatically reduces the risk of neural tube defects. This is a very real problem. Neural tube defects cause serious disabilities, loss of life. So the goal to reduce this was very legitimate. However, and I will say, mandatory fortification of folic acid did reduce neural tube defects from about 10 per 10,000 births down to 7 per 10,000 births. So in the United States, that's roughly 1,300 fewer cases per year, and that's wonderful. But, we've added this to the food supply to reduce, to go from 10 to 7. It's not nothing, but it's not, right? It's not what you might have hoped for. So why is that? The reason folic acid was chosen over real food folate is that folic acid is stable. It's already oxidized. So it survives the milling process. You got to bake the bread in an oven, right? It can survive the heat. It survives shelf storage, cooking. Reduced folate degrades with heat and light and oxygen. So you can't add folate to bread and then bake the bread and expect the folate to still be there. Right? You can't add something to a food that's going to break down in the conditions that are required to make the food. So there was a real practical constraint. But here's what that choice missed. Not all of the folic acid that entered the food supply made it into the cells. We can see that through the biochemistry here. The women most at risk, women with the C677T variant, they face the same DHFR bottleneck as everyone else, and then they have an additional slow point at MTHFR on top of it. So the population with the highest risk received the least effective form of the intervention. Had the fortification program used methylfolate, had that even been possible, given that this is being added to factory-made foods that have to have a shelf life, etc. But if it were feasible to add methylfolate, you would have bypassed both DHFR and MTHFR completely. And the reduction in neural tube defects would almost certainly have been much greater. So the goal was valid. The molecule was the only practical option at the time. But We've been running this now at population scale for every age, regardless of pregnancy status, for 28 years. And the research showing just how slow human DHFR actually is didn't arrive until 11 years after fortification began. All right, so what do you do with this? First, you don't need the MTHFR genetic test to act on this, okay? The folic acid problem applies to every human being. DHFR is slow in everyone. This is not a gene problem. You don't need a test to know that folic acid is going to be a problem. Even if you have tested and you do carry the C677T variant, here is something worth understanding about why MTHFR became such a big deal in the first place. The functional medicine and supplement industries can sell you methylfolate. There are products for MTHFR. This is a problem with a solution in a bottle, okay? There's no product for DHFR. There's no supplement for DHFR. It's simply how human beings are built. Every one of us, regardless of genetics. So that's not a story that sells anything. So the conversation landed on MTHFR, but in the context of everything that we've covered, the MTHFR variant is a relatively minor factor. Think about what the variant actually does in someone eating real food, digesting it well, with no folic acid in the picture. Half the folate in the food arrives as methylfolate already. The plant converted it. MTHFR doesn't have to touch it. If you have the variant, it has zero effect on half of the folate that you eat in real food. The other half is reduced folate, which means MTHFR's final conversion step is needed. And that's where the slowdown happens. So if you carry one copy of the variant, your MTHFR runs about 65% of capacity. So it runs about 35% slower. If you carry both, your MTHFR runs about 30%, so about 70% slower. So that sounds, oh my goodness, this sounds terrible, right? What we're being told is that you're working with a handicap, okay? But you're only working with a partial handicap on half of your folate intake. The other half is completely unaffected. No folic acid is loading the system. No UMFA is blocking receptors. Real folate is getting into the cells. The machinery works just slightly less efficiently on one portion. We've been told that this has more of an effect than it actually does. Now, let's consider the prevalence. Okay, so what's called homozygous C677T. This is 2 copies of the variant. So this is where now that enzyme is only running at about 30%. That's present in roughly 10 to 15% of people of European descent. However, in populations of indigenous Mesoamerican ancestry, so this would apply to Mexicans, Guatemalans, Central Americans, the rate is dramatically higher. A 2016 study of Mexican Amerindian groups found an average homozygous rate of 44.5%. In some specific Mayan populations from southern Mexico, that rate reaches 80%. That's not a rare variant. In some of these populations, it's the majority of people. And here's what's notable about those populations. So the Americas had almost no large domesticated animals before European contact. No cattle, no pigs, no sheep. The diet was built on corn, beans, squash, and particularly in Central America, whatever small game, insects, fish were available was predominantly plant-based. So a diet where half the folate already arrives as methylfolate, ready to use without MTHFR touching it. On that diet, a slower MTHFR enzyme is not a significant liability. The variant persisted because in the nutritional environment those populations evolved in, it was not a meaningful problem. The gene didn't change, the food supply did. If this variant were as clinically significant as the supplement industry suggests, that prevalence doesn't hold up evolutionarily. A variant driving severe chronic disease in nearly half of a population or 80% of a population would not have survived that long. And there's evidence it may have done more than just survive. Some research suggests, and again, this is not settled yet, this is some suggestion of this, that this variant, the C677T variant, is actually protective, might be protective against certain cancers, particularly colorectal cancer. Slower MTHFR shifts how folate is distributed, making certain folate forms less available to rapidly dividing cells. There's also research suggesting that certain pathogens depend on folate for their own replication, and a host, that's a person, with slightly reduced folate conversion efficiency may be a less hospitable environment for them, right? So this is sort of parallel to the sickle cell phenomenon, right? That trait can protect people from malaria. So, there's some evidence here that having a slower folate conversion rate to methylfolate might be beneficial in some environments or some situations. So again, these are hypotheses right now. There's some research suggesting this. It's not settled, but this goes back to our body is not stupid and defective and hates us and trying to kill us, right? Our body is trying to survive. It's trying to do the best it can in the environment that it's in. And so, we're so quick to assume, especially now that we have the ability to look at the human genome, we're so quick for any little variation to say, oh, this is it, this is a problem, you've got a genetic defect, all of this stuff. It's kind of counterintuitive, isn't it? I mean, wouldn't there be some beneficial reason behind some of these variations? So this is not like a broken gene. It's a gene that was doing something. We're not exactly sure what it's doing. We've got some leads, but it was adapted to a specific environment, a specific nutritional environment, potentially offering real advantages within that environment. So again, your body is not defective. Your genes are not defective. The food supply has changed. That's the problem. So, this whole MTHFR discussion and how, what is the clinical significance of this variant may largely be an artifact of the folic acid era. Separate the variant from the folic acid exposure, and what remains is a relatively mild metabolic quirk, not the master switch over chronic disease that it has been made out to be. So whether you carry it or not, you want to do the same things, okay? So second, let's talk about the food. Virtually every whole food, real food, that contains folate contains it in the reduced form, the form your body was designed to use. The answer here is not a specific list of foods to track down or avoid. Folate in the right form is in real food, essentially all of it. A wide variety of real, whole food, actual real food. That's the answer. And that's what I work on with my clients, right? We're not chasing a food list. We're adding in variety. In so many cases with my clients, we're actually adding some really, really wonderful foods back in to what they're eating because they've been avoiding them for so long because they've been given the poor advice about food triggers. Okay, so we want to be able to eat and digest and break down and metabolize We want to be able to break down a wide variety of food. And here is the full picture. The processed grain diet that is loading your body with folic acid is also failing to deliver the real nutrients that your body needs. So you're getting the synthetic molecule that creates the problem, and you're not getting the food that would have prevented it. But again, changing what you eat is only part of it. For a lot of migraine sufferers, there is another layer, and it is the one that I see constantly in my practice. Right? Many women with migraines are also restricting foods because they've been told that certain foods are triggering their migraine. So if you're restricting foods, you're restricting your folate intake before any of the rest of this even comes into play. And even with the right diet, right, digestion has to be working. We talked earlier that the cells lining your small intestine convert reduced folate to methylfolate during absorption. But before folate even reaches those cells, it's got to be extracted from the food. And that requires adequate stomach acid, adequate pancreatic enzymes, proper motility, food moving through at the right place, mixed and broken down in the way that it's supposed to be. Half the folate, I'm going to keep saying this because this is not what you're being told, half the folate in real food already arrives as methylfolate, ready to go. The other half, yes, it has to be converted by those intestinal cells, and MTHFR does that. But none of that happens if digestion is compromised. So, a lot of people change their diet and they still don't feel better. And that's often why the food changed, but the digestion did not. If your digestive system is not working, the best diet in the world cannot deliver what your cells need. Digestion in those cases is where we have to start. And third, if you do supplement with folate, use methylfolate. It's also written as 5-MTHF or L-methylfolate. Don't use folic acid. Methylfolate is already in that final form, and it bypasses both DHFR and MTHFR entirely, and it goes straight to where your cells need it. Most, unfortunately, inexpensive vitamins use folic acid because it costs less. So read the label. This is where reading the label really does matter. So in conclusion here, if you've made it this far through all of the biochemistry and so on, congratulations. So, just to summarize, the MTHFR conversation, it's been pointing at the wrong problem. Folic acid is a real problem. And, the natural medicine space did get there before mainstream medicine did. I do give credit for that. But pointing the finger at MTHFR instead of DHFR is pointing at the wrong enzyme. And it's not even talking about the importance of eating a wide variety of real food and having proper digestive function, right? You're only told that you've got a genetic problem and you are going to solve this with a capsule that you purchase from the company that's talking about it, okay? No one's talking about improving your digestive function so that you can eat a wide variety of food that you enjoy and then actually break that food down. And that error has changed everything about who this problem applies to. Because by anchoring this story to this genetic variation, it let the rest of the population believe that this doesn't apply to them. And it kept the conversation in the supplement territory because there's a supplement for MTHFR, methylfolate, in many forms from many companies, but there's no supplement for DHFR. DHFR is just how humans are built. You can't upregulate it. You can't put something in a capsule that's going to make it run faster. So the answer to the real problem can't come from a product. It's the food, the real food, a wide variety of food that you enjoy, because the nutrients that keep this whole system running come from different plants, different animals, different sources. This is how the body was designed to receive them. So eat real food, eat a wide variety of food. Your body has been handling that for a long time. It has had decades with folic acid in the food supply, and that is not going well. So if you're living with chronic migraines and you're ready to understand what's actually driving them and what you can do about it, I'd love to talk. I offer a free consultation call. The link is in the description. We'll talk about your migraines and any other health conditions you have, and we'll put together a game plan to get you feeling better. I'm telling you, it's going to be the best 30 minutes you've spent on your health in a long time. So thanks for being here. See you guys soon.